She's been stealing from him for years, my brother said, pointing straight at me across the conference table. She isolated him, controlled his money, and now she thinks she gets to walk away with everything. His wife nodded beside him, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she had clearly prepared in advance. My mother sat at the end of the table, hands folded, lips pressed thin. She had the look she always wore when she wanted me to feel the weight of disappointing her. The estate lawyer cleared his throat and looked at me. Do you have anything to say to these allegations? I checked my phone. Not because I had a message. Because I was waiting for a call. Not quite yet, I said. I'm expecting someone. My brother. I'll call him my brother because that's what he is on paper. Let out a short, contemptuous laugh. Of course she's stalling, he muttered to his wife. Classic. She has nothing. He was right that I was waiting. He was wrong about why. I had known this meeting was coming for 4 months. I had known it the day my grandfather passed, actually, at 78, in the hospital bed we'd rented for the living room of the house where I had lived with him for the last 3 years. I held his hand when he went. My brother was in Kelowna at a wine festival. He posted about it on Instagram the same afternoon. The conference room we were sitting in belonged to a firm on Bay Street in Toronto. My grandfather had chosen it, not me. He had chosen everything, actually, with a precision that still took my breath away when I thought about it. I was just the one who showed up. My phone buzzed. A number I recognized. I stood up and said, "He's here." The door opened and a woman walked in. She was maybe 60 in a plain navy blazer, carrying a canvas tote bag that looked like it had been through a few too many farmers' markets. She was not impressive looking. That was sort of the point. "My name is Miss Hartwell," she said, setting her tote on the table without ceremony. "I'm the trust officer at Dominion Fiduciary Services. We've been administering the estate of the deceased for the past 3 years." She pulled out a folder. "I understand there's been a claim of undue influence." My brother's lawyer, a man in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, sat forward. "We haven't been notified of any corporate trustee involvement. This is a straightforward estate matter." "It was straightforward," Ms. Hartwell said pleasantly, "until your clients filed a notice of objection last week." She placed a document on the table and slid it toward the estate lawyer, which, as you'll see, triggers Article 7. The estate lawyer opened it. His expression didn't change, but his hands went very still. I watched my sister-in-law look at her husband. He was already leaning over to his lawyer, whispering. My mother had gone rigid in her chair. She looked at me, and in that look was everything she'd been putting in it since I was 17 years old. The question, the demand, the assumption that I would somehow make this better for them because I always did. I didn't blink. I had driven my grandfather to that office on a Tuesday in February 3 years ago. There had been snow on the ground. He wore his old green parka and his good shoes, which he only brought out for occasions he considered real. He held my arm on the ice in the parking lot. I waited in the lobby while he met with his financial planner and the trust officer and the notary. He came out an hour later and said simply, "Done." Then he asked if I wanted to stop at Tim Hortons on the way home. I knew what he'd signed. I didn't touch a single form. I wasn't in the room. The estate lawyer looked up. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartwell, perhaps you could explain the nature of Article 7 to everyone present." She didn't rush. She pulled out a second document and set it down with the same unhurried movement she'd used for everything else. "This is the irrevocable trust agreement executed by the deceased 34 months ago. Article 7 is the no contest provision." She read it aloud, not quickly, not dramatically. Just the way you read a fact. "Any beneficiary or potential beneficiary who initiates legal proceedings challenging the validity of this trust or alleges incapacity or undue influence on the part of the grantor shall immediately and irrevocably forfeit any and all interest in the trust estate, as if said beneficiary had predeceased the grantor." The silence in that room was different from regular silence. It had a texture. My brother's lawyer said very carefully, "We'd like to withdraw the notice of objection." "It's been filed," the estate lawyer said, and entered. My brother pushed back from the table. "This is insane. He didn't know what he was doing. She had him completely." "Mr. Ashford," Miss Hartwell said, not raising her voice at all, I'd strongly suggest you let your counsel speak. My brother. Ashford is his last name too, obviously. We have the same father, stared at her. He was not used to being interrupted by women in canvas tote bags. He was not used to being interrupted at all. He was the kind of man who talked over people in meetings and called it assertiveness. He managed a mid-sized distribution company in Mississauga. He drove a truck he couldn't quite afford. He called my grandfather Gramps in the loud, performative way of someone who doesn't actually visit very often, but wants credit for the relationship. He looked at me. You set this up, he said, not a question. I looked back at him. I drove him to his appointments. What I did not say, because the time for saying things to him had passed, was this. I had driven my grandfather to his appointments because I was the one who lived with him. I was the one who was there. I was the one who had been there for 3 years while he declined slowly, and then quickly, while his balance got worse and his memory got patchy and the nights got harder. I was there at 3 a.m. when he had trouble breathing. I was there on the Tuesdays when he was sharp as a tack and wanted to watch the Blue Jays and argue about pitching. I was there for all of it. My brother called once a month, if that, and always on speakerphone, always half distracted, always with that particular tone people use when they're doing an obligation. But I was getting ahead of myself. What I was actually thinking about, sitting in that conference room on Bay Street, was a different table. A kitchen table, 11 years ago. I was 22. I had just graduated from Ryerson, from the communications program, which my family had made clear was not a serious degree. I had a part-time job at a magazine, and I was trying to figure out how to make rent in Toronto, which, even then, required a certain aggressive optimism. I hadn't asked anyone for money. I was proud of that. My grandfather had gotten sick that winter. Not critically, not yet, but enough that he needed help around the house. My grandmother had been gone for 6 years. He was living alone in the house in Scarborough, where my father and my brother had grown up, and it was getting to be too much. My mother called me. Not my brother. Me. I was 22 and single, and my apartment lease was ending anyway. Could I maybe move in with Grandpa for a few months, just until they figured something out? I said yes. I always said yes. That was what I did. A few months turned into a few years, turned into 3 more years, until I was 25, and then 28, and then 30. I became, in the language of CRA forms and social workers, an informal caregiver. I learned how to manage his medications. I learned how to talk to his doctor. I rearranged the house so he could navigate it safely when his knees got bad. I organized his finances because he didn't trust the bank, and he'd been paying the same insurance premium twice for 4 years because nobody had looked. I did not resent it. I want to be clear about that. I loved him. He was the person in my family who had always made me feel like I made sense to him. He asked real questions and listened to the answers. He remembered things I told him. He was not a perfect man, but he was a genuinely good one. And spending those years with him was not a sacrifice in the way my family seemed to assume it was. It was, honestly, some of the better years of my life. But my family treated it like a sacrifice, like I was doing them all a favor, which I suppose I was, but the way they framed it had a particular flavor, a particular implication. You're not doing much with your life anyway. The implication went, this works out for everyone. You get a place to live. We don't have to worry about Dad. It's practical. My brother moved to Mississauga. He got married. He had 2 kids who my grandfather adored and who came over exactly 4 times a year. Christmas, Easter, a summer visit, and Thanksgiving, and even then, usually with excuses attached. His wife, who I will call my sister-in-law because I've never quite managed to think of her as anything else, had opinions about how I was managing things that she shared with my mother, but never directly with me. She thought I was enmeshed. She had read something about that online. My mother contributed by visiting every few weeks and making comments. About the state of the house, about whether my grandfather was getting enough social interaction, about whether I was keeping him to myself. She did not, in those years, offer to take a shift. She did not offer money for the extra groceries or the medical equipment or the accessible bathroom renovation that my grandfather paid for out of pocket because provincial coverage was not what anyone would call generous. She offered opinions, she offered concern. These are free. The thing that happened, the specific thing, the one that I now recognize as the moment everything calcified, happened 2 years into my living there. My grandfather wanted to update his will. He told me about it over breakfast. He said he had been thinking, and he wanted to make sure things were handled properly. He asked if I could drive him to see a lawyer. I said yes. I always said yes. I sat in the waiting room of his lawyer's office, and I read a 2-year-old copy of Maclean's while he was in there for an hour and a half. I didn't ask what he did. He didn't volunteer it, not specifically. He just said, on the way home, "I want you to know that I see what you do. And I'm not going to pretend I don't." I told him he didn't need to do anything. He said, "I know I don't need to. That's not the point." I thought about that for a long time afterward, the distinction between need and point. My mother found out, somehow, the way my mother found out things. She called me. "Did you take Dad to see a lawyer?" I said yes. "And you didn't think to tell me?" I said it was his appointment. I was just the driver. "Melanie." That was the voice, the specific register she used when she wanted me to feel like a bad daughter. "You know how this looks. You know what people will think." I said I didn't know what people would think because I hadn't done anything. She said she wasn't accusing me of anything. She was just saying it looked a certain way. That was always how it went. She was never accusing me. She was just noting the optics. She was just raising a concern. She was just asking a question. I was Melanie, which is my name, and I was the one who was there. Over the next year and a half, as my grandfather declined more seriously, the dynamics in my sharpened the way dynamics do when money and mortality are in the same room. My brother started calling more. My mother started visiting more. My mother started visiting more. Suddenly, everyone was very interested in Grandpa, very attentive, very concerned. They were concerned about him, they said. They just wanted to see him. I did not block anyone from seeing him. I want to be extremely clear about that. The door was open. I kept a calendar on the fridge. I texted updates. I asked them to let me know in advance so I could make sure he was rested and it wasn't a bad pain day because there were bad pain days and they were not pleasant for him or for visitors. What I could not do was let people in at 11 o'clock on a weeknight or on 3 hours' notice, or when he was exhausted and his oxygen levels were low and the last thing he needed was emotional stimulation. I was not a hotel concierge. I was a caregiver managing a palliative situation with the tools available to me. My brother said I was controlling access. I said I was managing care. He said it was the same thing. It was not the same thing, but he had never been there, so he didn't know the difference. The Christmas before my grandfather died was the worst of it. My brother drove in from Mississauga on December 23rd. He called from the parking lot at 10:45 at night. He had not called ahead. My grandfather was asleep. He had had a hard day, his lungs were worse, and he had finally drifted off around 9 after I sat with him for an hour. I went to the door. I cracked it open. My brother was standing on the porch. His wife was in the car. He smelled like a holiday party. I said quietly that Grandpa was sleeping and it wasn't a good time. He said he had every right to see his grandfather. I said I wasn't disputing that. I was saying it was 11 o'clock and he was asleep and it wasn't a good time. My brother put his hand on the door frame. He said, "You've been keeping him from us for 2 years. I'm not leaving." From the bedroom, I heard the oxygen monitor, my grandfather's voice, quiet and frightened. "Who's there?" I said, "Nobody, Grandpa, go back to sleep." My brother heard his voice and said it louder. "Gramps, it's me, it's—" "Stop." I said it firmly enough that he did, actually, stop. "He's scared. Look at the monitor." I closed the door. I stood against it. I listened to my brother bang on it twice more, and then the sound of his car backing out of the driveway. I sat on the floor in the hallway for a while. My grandfather fell back asleep. I checked his levels every 20 minutes until midnight. My brother told my mother I had physically prevented him from seeing his dying grandfather. My mother told the rest of the family. It became the story. I knew it would be the story. I knew that before I closed the door. I closed it anyway because my grandfather had asked me to keep him safe, and that was my job, and I was going to do it. What I did not know, what I had not asked, because it felt presumptuous and transactional and not the reason I was there, was exactly what my grandfather had arranged with the trust office. I knew there was a trust. He'd told me that much over time in the particular way he told me things, matter of fact, without preamble, as if it were simply part of the record. He'd said at one point, everything I have is protected, you understand? Nobody can move it without the bank. He said it the way you say things you want to make sure someone remembers. I remembered. What I didn't know was that he'd also kept a log. He called it his account book, which was a funny thing to call a personal diary, but my grandfather was funny in his particular way. He had kept it apparently for 5 years. He logged every phone call, every visit, every time he called and went to voicemail, every birthday, every time he sat waiting and no one came. Miss Hartwell pulled it out of her canvas tote bag in that conference room and set it on the table, and I felt something happen to my chest that I couldn't quite name. "We are designating this as Exhibit A," she said. "The deceased's personal correspondence log, cross-referenced with Roger's wireless records for his account over a 60-month period." My brother's lawyer tried again. "Personal diaries are subjective." "Phone records are not," Miss Hartwell said, still pleasantly. "Shall I proceed?" She read from an entry dated the previous February, my brother's birthday. My grandfather had written in his handwriting, which I knew well, which was large and slightly left-leaning, "Called Derek after lunch, went to voicemail, left message, no call back, sent text, happy birthday, thinking of you. Read receipt, no reply." She placed the corresponding Rogers bill beside the log, outgoing call to a number ending in 2277, duration 9 seconds, no incoming calls from that number that day. Outgoing text at 1014 p.m. Delivered. No response. My brother's wife looked at the table. Miss Hartwell turned a page. Entry dated previous June. Father's Day. Waited for Derek and Carolyn. They said they'd come for dinner. Melanie made pot roast. 6 o'clock, no call. 7 o'clock texted. 8:30, they said they were tired from the drive. I ate alone. Melanie stayed with me. I had forgotten about that dinner. I had made the pot roast because my grandfather specifically asked for it. I had made enough for 6 people because he was excited. He had set the table himself, which was unusual, which should have told me something. I had not remembered the table being set until she read that entry aloud. My mother made a sound that was either a breath or the beginning of a word. She didn't finish it. Miss Hartwell read 3 more entries. 2 missed birthdays, a hospital visit that never materialized, and then, last, the Christmas entry. December 23rd, very late. Derek came without calling. I was asleep. I was frightened when I heard the pounding. My heart rate went high. Melanie checked the monitor. He'd been drinking. She sent him away. He scared me and she kept me safe. She always keeps me safe. The room was extremely quiet. My brother said, "That's." "Mr. Ashford," his lawyer said, 1 word. The estate lawyer looked at my brother. "The notice of objection your clients filed alleges isolation and undue influence. The trust officer has now entered into evidence 5 years of documented contact attempts by the deceased and a contemporaneous account of the December incident that directly contradicts the account your clients provided." He paused. "I need to advise everyone in this room that making false statements in the context of an estate proceeding in Ontario can constitute fraud." My brother's lawyer requested a break. "We can take 5 minutes," the estate lawyer said. "The trust provisions aren't going to change." I looked at my mother while everyone shifted in their chairs. She was looking at Ms. Hartwell's canvas tote bag. She looked like she was trying to calculate something. She had always been better at calculation than at feeling, which was maybe the saddest thing I could say about her. She looked at me. I thought about being 17. I thought about the summer I spent working at a grocery store to save for university and coming home to find my mother had borrowed $400 from my account. Not asked, borrowed, which meant she thought it was fine because they'd had a shortfall that month. I thought about the way she'd said when I mentioned it. You've never understood how much it costs to run a household. I was 17. I didn't have a household to run. I had a grocery store job and a savings account, and I had trusted her. I thought about the years of that, the texture of it, the way shortfall became a standing word, a kind of password that meant, give us money and be glad we're letting you help. The way my usefulness to my family had always been primarily financial and logistical. The way love in my family had always been threaded with obligation so tightly, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Until I moved in with my grandfather and watched how he loved people and understood there was a difference. She looked at me, my mother, and I did not look away. When everyone came back to the table, the landscape had changed. My brother's lawyer tried to withdraw the notice of objection. The estate lawyer confirmed it had been filed and entered. Ms. Hartwell confirmed that the no contest clause had therefore been triggered under Article 7. My brother said flatly, "So what does that mean?" "It means," the estate lawyer said, "that your interest in the trust has been forfeited, as of the filing of the notice of objection." My sister-in-law made a sound. My brother stood up. His chair hit the wall behind him. He pointed at me and said, "You are unbelievable." His voice cracked in the middle. I don't think he meant it to. I said nothing. I had nothing to say to him that would help either of us. He said, "He was my grandfather too." I said, "I know." "And you sat there and let us." "I told you not to file," I said. That part was true. 6 weeks ago, when I'd first heard through my mother that they were talking to a lawyer, I had called my brother. I had said clearly, "I know you're angry, and I know you think this is wrong, but please talk to someone before you file anything. Please, just get independent legal advice first." He had said he didn't need my advice. He had said I had been orchestrating this for years. He had hung up. I had not called back. I had gone back to organizing my grandfather's estate documents, which at that point I had been doing for 3 weeks, and I had waited. My mother said from her end of the table very quietly, "Was there anything left for us?" She meant money. She meant, was there anything not in the trust? Was there a back door, a codicil, something she'd missed? I looked at her. "He left you his record collection," I said. "He wanted you to have it. He wrote it down." She blinked. "He still thought about you," I said. "He just knew who was actually there." She didn't say anything to that. I don't know if she understood it or if she just couldn't find a response that didn't cost her something. My brother left without speaking to me again. His lawyer followed, already on the phone. My sister-in-law touched my mother's arm on the way out and said something I couldn't hear. I stayed while Miss Hartwell packed her tote bag. The estate lawyer was making notes. Outside the window, Bay Street was doing what it always did, indifferent and continuous. "He was very organized," Ms. Hartwell said, not looking up from her papers. "We don't get many clients like that. Most people think about the money. He thought about the documentation." I said, "He was an accountant for 30 years. She smiled at that. "It shows." I thought about him in the parking lot in his good shoes, holding my arm on the ice. The way he'd said "done" and asked if I wanted Tim Hortons like we'd just run an errand, like protecting 3 decades of careful savings from people who would spend it in 18 months was just another Tuesday. Maybe it was, for him. I drove home, not to the Scarborough house anymore. I had moved back to my own apartment after the estate entered probate, which had felt strange and necessary in equal measure. The apartment was small, and mine and it felt, after 3 years, both familiar and slightly foreign. I sat at the kitchen table for a while without turning on a light. I thought about what it meant to be, in your family's estimation, the practical one, the one you call when things need doing, the one who doesn't ask for much, which is convenient, which gets mistaken for not having needs. The one who files papers and drives to appointments and makes pot roast and sits on the floor at midnight checking oxygen monitors. The one who is very useful right up until the moment being useful means you get something, at which point you become suspect. I had carried their version of me for a long time. The girl who takes things. The one who maneuvered. The one who was somehow, conveniently, always where the money was. I was where the money was because I was where he was. I was where he was because I showed up. I showed up because I loved him and because someone had to, and because when he held my arm on the ice in that parking lot in February, I could feel that he was getting smaller and I was not going to let him get smaller alone. That was the whole story. There was no other version of it. My phone had 3 unread messages from numbers I recognized. I opened my contacts. I didn't block them. I just held my phone for a while, in the dark, and thought about what it meant to close a door. 6 weeks later, the transfer was complete. Ms. Hartwell called to confirm. Liquid assets deposited. Property deeds recorded. The final order entered. The numbers were large enough that they still felt abstract, the way large numbers do when you've spent 3 years thinking in terms of medication schedules and grocery budgets. My brother and his wife filed for creditor protection 4 months after that. The legal fees from the estate challenge were not, it turned out, something their budget absorbed easily. I heard about this from my mother, who called to tell me in a tone that suggested she expected me to feel responsible. I said I was sorry to hear that. I was sorry about a lot of things that had nothing to do with the money. My grandfather's record collection arrived at my mother's house in 3 boxes. She sent me a photo of it, just the boxes, without any text. I don't know what she wanted me to do with that. I looked at the photo for a long time. He had good taste in records, 70s soul, a lot of it. Some early country that would have surprised people who didn't know him well. He used to play them on Sunday mornings in the Scarborough house when the light came through the back windows and the coffee was ready and everything was quiet and fine. I have the record player. He left it to me specifically, which I only learned when the estate lawyer read the personal effects list. I have it set up in the corner of my apartment. I play it sometimes on Sunday mornings, when the light comes through my own windows at the right angle, and I have nowhere to be and nothing to prove. I don't call first anymore. I don't check to see if it's convenient. I just put on a record and let it play. And I think about a man who wore his good shoes to sign the papers that protected us both, who called it done and asked if I wanted Tim Hortons, who wrote down every birthday and every silence, who knew the difference between need and point. I think about him and I let the record play. I keep thinking about my grandfather in that parking lot, the way he held my arm on the ice without asking, like it was just the natural thing to do. He wore his good shoes that day. He always wore his good shoes when something mattered. That image stays with me because I think it says something true about how consequences actually work, not in some abstract cosmic sense, just in the plain practical sense of cause and effect. My grandfather spent decades watching how people behaved when nothing was at stake, and he made his decisions accordingly. He didn't punish anyone. He just paid attention. What happened in that conference room on Bay Street wasn't some dramatic reversal of fortune. It was simply the record catching up to people who assumed no one was keeping one. My brother built a story about me over years. I was the one who had maneuvered, the one who had kept everyone away. And he told that story so many times that I think he genuinely started to believe it. But a story isn't documentation. A story can't be cross-referenced against a phone bill. That's the thing about choosing to actually do right by someone. It leaves a different kind of trace than just claiming you did. I was not a perfect caregiver. There were nights I was exhausted and short-tempered and I made the wrong call on small things. But I showed up. I made the pot roast. I sat on the floor at midnight. And my grandfather, who had been an accountant for 30 years and understood better than anyone that the numbers don't lie, wrote it all down. That's the part I come back to most, honestly. Not the trust, not the no contest clause, not my brother's lawyer going pale when Miss Hartwell read from the Rogers records. It's the fact that my grandfather had the clarity and the discipline to protect something carefully over years, quietly, without telling me, without making it about himself. That takes a particular kind of intelligence, not cleverness. Something steadier than cleverness. The ability to think past the emotion of a situation and ask, what actually needs to happen here and what will it take to make sure it does? I didn't have that at 22 or 25. I had good intentions and a capacity for hard work and a fairly high tolerance for being underestimated. Those things were enough to get through each day. They weren't enough on their own to build something lasting. What I learned from him, what I'm still learning honestly, is that showing up is necessary, but it isn't sufficient. You have to think clearly while you're showing up. You have to understand the terrain. You have to be willing to do the unglamorous, undramatic work of making sure the right things are documented, arranged, protected. That's not cynicism. That's just taking your responsibilities seriously enough to follow them all the way through. And then there's the question of how long you keep going when it costs you. When your family is telling a story about you that isn't true, and the people who should know better have decided to believe it because it's convenient. That requires something different from intelligence or integrity. It requires a willingness to stay steady when staying steady feels like losing. To close a door at midnight because the person inside asked you to, knowing that door will be used against you later, and do it anyway. I don't think my grandfather intended his account book as a lesson. He just kept it because he was meticulous and because I think writing things down was how he processed the loneliness of those years. But it became one. It became the clearest argument I've ever seen for the idea that what you actually do, consistently, over time, in the unremarkable moments when no one is watching, is the only thing that holds up in the end. The record player is in the corner of my apartment. Sunday mornings, I put on a record and I don't explain myself to anyone. That's enough. That has always been enough.